The story I'm going to tell you began with a smell. It's funny, we think great adventures start with thunder or a scream, but mine began with the smell of mold, mothballs, and time standing still, the smell of Grandma Elsie's house. I had gotten her key about 2 months earlier, after she passed away. The house was huge, one of those old brick houses, with a backyard that used to be an orchard and had now turned into nothing but overgrown weeds. I was put in charge by the family of doing a full clean-out, keeping what mattered, throwing away what didn't, and putting the house up for sale. It was a thankless task. Going through the things of someone you love is like reliving everything all over again, only without the person there to hug you afterward. I spent weeks organizing the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms. But the place I kept putting off was the attic. The attic. To me, it was always a portal to another time. Grandma Elsie had a habit of never throwing away anything that had a story. And in the attic, she kept the history of the world. One hot January afternoon, I finally worked up the courage. I opened the small wooden hatch in the hallway ceiling, pulled down the rope ladder that creaked like an old animal, and climbed up. The air up there was dense and heavy. It felt like the oxygen had been replaced with dust made of memories. The light coming in through the small round attic windows barely illuminated the piles of boxes, furniture covered with white sheets, and stacks of newspapers from decades ago. I started in one corner, methodically, throwing away empty containers, separating baby clothes that had turned into fabric ghosts, and finding love letters Grandma and Grandpa had exchanged when they were young, which made me cry a little, I admit. I eventually reached a dark wooden trunk, the kind you usually only see in pirate movies, but which in real life just held the family's most important clutter. It was at the back of the attic, hidden behind a broken dresser. I opened the trunk. Inside, there was no gold or jewelry. There were documents. Yellowed birth certificates, land deeds that would be worth a fortune today, and at the very bottom, rolled up and tied with thick twine, there it was, the map. It wasn't a treasure map. It was a map of the city. I unrolled the paper, which was so thin and brittle it felt like parchment. It was a detailed municipal map, printed in sepia, with some handwritten notes in blue pen, notes I immediately recognized as Grandma Elsie's, from her round, steady handwriting. Judging by the print style and the names of some avenues that had since been renamed, I guessed it dated from the 1950s, maybe the early 1960s. I was sweating, my throat irritated from the dust, but I stayed there, crouched, studying that piece of paper. I'd lived in that neighborhood my whole life. I knew every alley, every square. But the more I looked, the more something bothered me. I looked for the name of our street, of course. I found it. Hydrangea Street. Right next to it, Jasmine Street, Central Square. Everything matched. But then I slid my finger west, toward the area where the large municipal park is today, the one they built in the 1990s, with skate ramps and outdoor gym equipment. On that old map, where today there was neatly trimmed grass and young trees, there was a neighborhood. The name was handwritten in Grandma's blue pen, Hope Village. I stopped breathing for a second. I looked again. It wasn't a printing mistake. The neighborhood was there in detail. Streets, blocks, even the drawing of a small chapel at its center. It looked like a normal, small suburban neighborhood, wedged between our area and what back then had been nothing but river brush. I knew that area like the back of my hand. I grew up playing soccer in that park. I was absolutely sure that Hope Village had never existed there. That land had always been empty, vacant for years, until it became the park. I thought, this map is just too old. It must have been a housing development that never got built. But Grandma Elsie wouldn't have kept a map of a failed project in the trunk with the most important family items. And her notes suggested she had visited or known the place. There was a bright red circle drawn around one of Hope Village's streets, and a small X next to a specific block. I climbed down from the attic dizzy, holding the map like it was made of glass. Late afternoon light filled the living room, but my stomach tightened with unease. The first thing I did was look for modern confirmation. I turned on the computer, opened Google Maps, found my house, scrolled west, Municipal Park. No surprises. I searched online, Hope Village, city name. Nothing. Hope Villages in other towns came up, but none in our area. I got more specific: history of municipal park, park name. I read old articles about the park's opening, about the city buying the land in the 1980s. They all described the area as a sanitary buffer, or non-urbanized land, for decades. I was holding proof that the official history was wrong, or that Grandma Elsie's map was an extremely convincing fake. But why would she do that? That night I barely slept. The image of the streets drawn on that yellowed paper kept spinning in my head. The next day, I didn't go to work. I needed answers. I put the map on the passenger seat of my car. I was going to do what any obsessed person would do: go there. The municipal park is about a 10-minute drive from Grandma's house. I parked near the main entrance. It was a nice day, people jogging, parents pushing strollers. A place full of life and leisure. I opened Grandma's map. I had memorized the layout. Sunflower Road, Hope Village's main street, should have started exactly where the smoothie and snack kiosk stood. I walked over to the kiosk, closed my eyes and tried to imagine the street. Houses. Sidewalks. The smell of fresh bread. But there was only the smell of fried food and the noise of children. I walked across the grass, mentally following the streets that existed only on my map. The red circle Grandma had drawn was right in the middle of the small soccer field. The X was where a carefully tended flower bed now stood. I found no ruins. No foundations. Not even a misplaced brick. It was as if the neighborhood had been erased completely, without leaving a trace. I sat on a bench, feeling my frustration turn into something colder, something closer to fear. This wasn't just a wrong map. It was a denial of physical reality. It was as if part of the city I knew had been replaced by something else, and only I had proof of the older version. I thought of asking someone older. Mr. Albert, Grandma's neighbor, was the oldest person on the street. He was nearly 90, but his memory was sharp. I went straight to his house. "Mr. Albert, may I bother you for a moment?" He was watering ferns on the porch, a friendly old man wearing a straw hat. "Of course, my boy. Come and sit down. What brings you here? Have you sold Elsie's house yet?" "Not yet. I'm cleaning it out." And I found something that puzzled me. I showed him the map, carefully unrolling it on the coffee table. "Well, look at that," he said. "An old map. From when the city was still mostly empty land. Mr. Albert, do you recognize this area here?" I pointed to where Hope Village was drawn. He put his reading glasses on and leaned in. His trembling finger traced the paper. "This part here? That's the Dry River area, out back. New development, right? When I moved here back in the 50s, it was all pasture." "And do you remember a Hope Village in that area? A neighborhood that existed there, where the park is now?" Mr. Albert stopped smiling, but he frowned, looked at the map, then at me, then back at the map again. "Hope Village? Oh, my boy. I don't remember that name at all," he said. "Nothing was ever built there. The city always had trouble with that land, too damp, too close to the river. The development that actually took off was ours, near the station. That one." He pointed to Hope Village on the map. "I think it was just a project a contractor tried to sell, but it never went anywhere." "But this map looks like a finished neighborhood, Mr. Albert," I said. "Look at the streets, the chapel drawn in. It could be a sketch, an old promotional map. Hope Village, no. If a neighborhood had existed there, I would have known. I was a mailman in this area for 20 years. I delivered mail everywhere." He handed the map back to me, shaking his head, certain I was wasting my time on a rough draft. I left Mr. Albert's house even more confused. He was the living memory of the neighborhood, and he denied Hope Village's existence entirely. At that moment, the story stopped being a historical curiosity and became personal. Grandma Elsie didn't keep junk. If she kept this map, and if she had made notes on it, it meant Hope Village existed for her. I went back home and started digging through the boxes again, but now with a different focus. I was no longer looking for objects. I was looking for Grandma Elsie's history. She had always been a storyteller, but she was guarded about the deeper parts of her past. I spent the entire night back in the attic, lit by a weak bulb. I searched for journals, notebooks, anything that mentioned Hope Village. I found another clue, And this one flipped a switch in my mind. It was at the bottom of a shoebox full of old photographs, black and white prints with scalloped edges. Most were family photos, picnics, birthdays. But among them was one that was different. It was a photo of a house. A simple wooden house with a small garden in front. The photo looked like it was taken in the 1950s, judging by the car parked out front. On the back of the photo, in Grandma Elsie's round handwriting, written in pencil and nearly erased by time, were the words, "Our first home. 12 Sunflower Street. Sunflower Street. The main street of Hope Village, drawn on the map." My heart started pounding, a drumbeat in the attic darkness. My grandmother didn't just know Hope Village, she had lived there. That house in the photo was her first home. But how? If Mr. Albert, who had been a mailman and lived 10 minutes away, said the neighborhood never existed? I took the map and the photo. According to the map, 12 Sunflower Street should be exactly where the smoothie kiosk now stood in the park. That neighborhood hadn't just been demolished. It had been erased. And the only thing left was my grandmother's memory, preserved in a map and a photograph. I started to feel like I wasn't investigating a place, but a family secret. Why had Grandma never talked about that house? Why had she never mentioned Sunflower Street? The photo was the missing proof of life. Hope Village wasn't a proposal, it was a lived reality. I needed more than Mr. Albert's memory. I needed official documents, someone who had worked at City Hall back then. But who could I ask? The municipal archive was a maze, and I didn't even have a neighborhood name to search for, since it didn't exist in modern records. I looked at the map again. The red circle. The X. What did they mean? The red circle was drawn over Sunflower Street. Grandma's home, the X, was on a block near the edge of the neighborhood, toward the river. I decided to focus on the X. It felt more urgent, more important. In the middle of the night, I took a photo of the map with my phone, marked the exact location of the X, and went back to the computer. I had to find some trace of what happened there, at that specific point. If the neighborhood was erased, someone had to do the work. Demolition. Land purchases. Relocation of families. That leaves paperwork. I dove into the city's digital archives, searching for any mention of land seizures or clearances in the Dry River area between 1950 and 1980. It took hours. My eyes were burning, and I was close to giving up when I found a tiny newspaper article from 1978, buried in the municipal notices section. The headline was blunt: Dry River area sanitized after incident. The article mentioned the shutdown of an old illegal dumping site that had caused a typhoid outbreak. The city had isolated the area and carried out an extensive sanitary cleanup. The location was described as the area near the former unofficial settlement, locally known as the River Houses. The River Houses. Not Hope Village. But the location matched the park perfectly. A chill ran through me. A disease outbreak. Isolation. Sanitary cleanup. That explained the urgency to erase the place. But why had Grandma never told us she lived somewhere that had been wiped off the map because of an epidemic? I needed more details about that incident. Grandma was a strong woman, but the idea that she had lived through something like that, and kept it secret, tightened my throat. By morning, I had a plan. I could no longer rely on neighbors' memories. I needed hard facts. I decided to focus on finding a birth record of someone who had lived in Hope Village. If Grandma lived there, she must have had a neighbor, a friend, someone who could tell me the version of the story missing from official records. I took the map again. The red circle on Sunflower Street. Grandma's house. I had to find out who lived on Sunflower Street. But how? Then I remembered that Grandma Elsie was deeply involved with the local church. She kept every mass leaflet, every baptism and confirmation keepsake. I went back to the attic, this time searching for anything connected to the small chapel drawn on the map. And there it was. In a velvet box filled with rosaries and prayer beads, I found a small hardbound notebook that looked like a diary, but it wasn't personal. It was a registry. The first page was written in Grandma's handwriting, but in a more formal tone. Baptism records of St. Anne's Chapel, Hope Village. Beginning 1954. Grandma Elsie wasn't just a resident, she was responsible for keeping the chapel's records. That explained her handwriting on the map. She was the guardian of that place's memory. I began flipping through the book, my hands shaking. Names, dates, godparents. It was a list of all the residents, or at least their children, of Hope Village. I was holding the census of a suburb that officially never existed. I stopped on the page closest to the date of the house photo. 1958. And I found what I was looking for. Name, Mary and Smith. Date of baptism, 05/15/1958. Address, 14 Sunflower Street, next door to Grandma, who lived at number 12. Godparents, Elsie and Harold, my grandparents. Mary Ann Smith. She would be in her 60s now. If she was still alive, and if I could find her, she would be the key to understanding what the map was hiding. Hope Village wasn't just a place. It was a community, and I finally had the name of one of its residents. I closed the registry book carefully. The map, the photograph, and the small ledger were now spread out on the kitchen table. I had stopped cleaning the house and started digging up ghosts. The next step was clear. I had to find Mary Ann Smith. She would tell me what happened to Hope Village, and why Grandma Amelia had kept the secret for so long. I had the feeling that what I was about to uncover wouldn't be just about a neighborhood, but about what people are capable of doing to forget a tragedy, and what my grandmother did to preserve the truth. I was ready to follow Mary Ann's trail and uncover what the so-called sanitary incident of 1978 had really hidden. I had the map. I had the name. Now I was going after living history. The mystery was only beginning. The map was creased and worn, but in my hands it felt heavy as lead. I had the name, Mary Ann Smith, and the certainty that she was the key to understanding what had happened in Hope Village. My first stop was the most obvious route, and also the most frustrating: the records. I spent 3 days buried in county offices and civil registry rooms, breathing dust and the smell of old paper. Mary Ann Smith is a name you find everywhere in the English-speaking world, and the system didn't help. I couldn't exactly ask, "Do you have records of a Mary Ann who disappeared from a suburb wiped off the map by a fake sanitation incident in 1978? I tried to be subtle. I requested old certificates, searched for resident lists from the area that today was nothing but a large industrial wasteland. But the books mysteriously stopped just before 1978. It was as if 1977 jumped straight to 1979, like the middle had been ripped out by a giant hand. What I did find were cold, bureaucratic documents talking about relocation of families for public health reasons and amicable land expropriation. Amicable? My grandmother hadn't found any of it amicable. I was close to giving up on the official route when I remembered what my grandmother always said: "If the government hides the story, look for the people who lived it." I changed strategy. I left the air-conditioned offices and went out into the streets, into the oldest neighborhoods of the city, the ones that had seen the city grow and swallow everything around them. I ended up at a tiny, almost forgotten municipal museum, housed in a small old building near the city's first church. The place was run by a man in his late 70s, thin, with glasses perched on the tip of his nose and a wary look in his eyes. His name was Mr. Elias. He sat behind a wooden counter, reading a leather-bound book, and the air smelled of mothballs and memory. "Looking for something specific, young man?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the book. "Yes, Mr. Elias. I'm looking for history. Unwritten history." He slowly raised his head and studied me. I must have been in my early 30s, and he could tell I wasn't an academic or a tourist. "Unwritten history usually brings trouble," he said. "And headaches." He looked back down at his book. I knew I had to be direct, but careful. I took out the envelope Mary Ann had sent to my grandmother, the one with the nervous handwriting. "Have you ever heard of Hope Village?" Mr. Elias's reaction was immediate. He closed the book with a dry thump that echoed through the silent room. He removed his glasses and stared at me. Suspicion turned into fear, or maybe a deep, old exhaustion. "Hope Village doesn't exist," he said. "It's an urban legend. A neighborhood that was supposed to be built, but the project failed." "That's not what I was told," I insisted, pulling the folded map from my pocket. I slowly unfolded it on the counter, showing him the simple drawing, the hand-drawn streets, the marked X. My grandmother, Amelia, lived there. And she kept this map for 40 years. Mr. Elias took the map with trembling hands. He ran his finger along the main street, which my grandmother had labeled Joy Street. His eyes filled with tears. My God, this is old. Very old. Where did you get this? In my grandmother's attic. She wanted me to find Mary Ann. And there, in that stuffy museum, the wall of silence the city had built began to crack. Mr. Elias let out a deep sigh, as if lifting a weight he had carried since 1978. Sit down, my boy. Sit. This isn't a story to be told standing up. He told me about Hope Village. It wasn't a failed project. It was a vibrant suburb of working-class families, built with sweat and determination in the 1960s. A place of colorful houses, children playing in the streets until dark, and neighbors who all knew each other. It was a real community, he said softly. Not rich, but happy. And it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The land where Hope Village stood was geologically perfect for an industrial expansion project the city council and a group of major businessmen had been planning since the early 1970s. They needed that ground to build the new industrial district. They tried to buy it, of course. Offered scraps. But the people there were stubborn. They didn't want to leave. That was their life. Then came the so-called sanitary incident of 1978. Mr. Elias explained that there was no chemical leak, no mysterious disease. It was all staged. They spread rumors that the water was contaminated, that a typhoid outbreak was starting. They called the press, but only the outlets they controlled. Within days, the city was in panic. The government declared a public health emergency. Police, and unbelievably, even the army, were sent in to evacuate the area for decontamination. They didn't give anyone time to take anything. Said it was dangerous to touch their belongings. People were removed with only the clothes they were wearing, promised they'd return in 2 weeks. But 2 weeks became forever. While families were dumped into temporary shelters on the distant outskirts, bulldozers and heavy machinery moved into Hope Village. They didn't just tear the houses down, Mr. Elias said. They erased the ground, leveled everything, covered it with dirt, concrete. Total erasure. In less than 3 months, Hope Village was a construction site for the industrial district, and the whole city breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they'd escaped a plague. My throat tightened. It was a tragedy of ambition and power. Not a mistake, a calculated crime. And Mary Ann? I asked. Mr. Elias sighed. Ah, Mary Ann. She was a force of nature. An elementary school teacher. She and your grandmother, Amelia, were the only ones who didn't buy the typhoid story. They tried to organize resistance, collect evidence, talk to lawyers. But it was 1978. Who dared confront power? He told me Mary Ann had managed to gather documents and photographs, hiding them before the forced evacuation. She trusted my grandmother, who lived in a part of the city untouched by the expropriation. She gave everything to Amelia and said, "If I disappear, you tell the truth." And Mary Ann disappeared. She never went to the shelters. She simply vanished, or was made to vanish. I understood the weight of the envelope, the urgency of the handwriting. Mary Ann had been on the run when she wrote it, trying to ensure that Hope Village's memory wouldn't be buried with its houses. The map, I said, pointing to it. What does the X mean? Mr. Elias shook his head. That, I don't know. But Amelia and Mary Ann were obsessed with proving the place existed. The map must mark something they hid. Something that proves the lie. I thanked Mr. Elias. He had given me more than I expected, the truth and my grandmother's mission. I left the museum under the harsh sun, but the world felt colder. I had to go there. I had to see, with my own eyes, where Hope Village had been murdered. The map was crude, but my phone was modern. Using the old street layout and a creek that still existed, I triangulated the exact location on satellite imagery. The contrast was shocking. Where my grandmother's map showed small houses, fruit trees, and Joy Street, the modern map showed gray warehouses, barbed wire fences, and loading yards, the heart of the industrial district. I drove toward the edge of the city, following the trail of memory. The closer I got, the more the landscape changed. Homes gave way to high walls, electronic surveillance, and the metallic smell of factories. I reached the approximate spot. Joy Street, according to the projection, ran directly beneath the main warehouse of a multinational logistics company. But the X on the map was slightly offset, right at the property boundary, in what looked like a forgotten service area. I parked far away and continued on foot, pretending to be lost. Security at the front was tight, so I had to circle the complex. I walked along a dirt road running parallel to the back wall of the industrial district. The wall was tall, ugly concrete, covered in old graffiti. Then the dirt road turned into sparse scrubland. I was almost there. The map indicated that the X was where Mary Ann's backyard once stood, at the end of Joy Street, close to the creek. I reached the spot. The factory's barbed wire fence curved oddly, leaving a small triangular patch of forgotten land between the wall and the foul-smelling creek. It was a bleak place, full of trash and debris. I jumped over the loose wire and entered the lot. The ground was hard, compacted, covered with gravel and bits of concrete. I began to search carefully. I knelt and started digging with my hands, moving stones and loose dirt. My heart was pounding. What did I expect to find? A chest? A diary? It didn't take long. The soil wasn't natural. It was full of broken fragments of old bricks, that deep reddish color no one uses anymore. I was digging where a life had been buried. Then my fingers touched something smooth and cold. I pulled it out. It was a piece of tile. Not industrial tile, but decorative ceramic, painted with a blue and yellow flower. The kind someone chooses carefully for a kitchen or bathroom. I held the tile in my hand. It was silent proof. A house had stood here. A family had lived here. I kept digging in the same spot, following instinct. The X didn't mark treasure. It marked the truth. And then the shovel, I'd brought a small gardening tool as a cover, struck something harder. It wasn't stone. It felt like wood, old, almost petrified. I brushed the dirt away and pulled. It was a small wooden box, sealed with old wax and wrapped in thick plastic, probably to protect it from the soil's moisture. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. This was what Mary Ann Smith had hidden. This was what my grandmother, Amelia, had kept secret for decades. I backed away from the wall, sat on the ground, and broke the wax seal. The plastic tore, revealing the dark wood. The box wasn't large, maybe the size of a thick book. I opened the lid carefully. Inside were two things. First, a stack of black and white photographs, yellowed with age. They were pictures of Hope Village, weddings, summer fairs, smiling children, Joy Street full of people. Irrefutable proof that the place had existed, and that it had been happy. In many photos I recognized the young, determined face of Mary and in some, my grandmother Amelia's smile. The second item was a notebook. A diary really. Black hardback cover. On the first page, Mary Ann's handwriting, the same as on the envelope, so the memory won't die. 1978. I started flipping through the diary, reading the last entries. She described the panic, the arrival of the trucks, the lie as it spread. She wrote about fear but also anger. And she mentioned a detail Mr. Elias hadn't known. A detail that explained why the suburb had to be erased so quickly and so violently. It wasn't only for industrial expansion. It was for what they'd found beneath Hope Village. Mary Ann wrote that during the land survey phase for the new industrial district, the engineers discovered a mineral deposit of extremely high value, something rare and strategic, worth billions. Hope Village wasn't just in the wrong place, I murmured, a chill crawling up my spine. It was sitting on top of a treasure. This sanitary incident had been the perfect smokescreen for an illegal seizure and the theft of a fortune that belonged to the public, or at the very least, to the country. The diary described how she and my grandmother had tried to get soil samples, tried to speak to newspapers from outside the area, but were silenced. In the last entry, dated November 1978, the handwriting was nearly illegible, rushed. Amelia managed to get out with the map. I'm being followed. They know I have the evidence. I'm going to hide the box where we agreed in the yard. If I don't come back, Amelia, tell everything. They can't steal our ground and our history. They can't erase us. Mary Ann had sacrificed herself for the truth. And my grandmother, Amelia, had spent her entire life waiting for the right moment for that truth to come into the light. I looked at the gray wall, at the imposing warehouse rising over Hope Village's ashes. I had the proof. I had the map, the photographs, and the diary. But I still didn't have the end of the story. What happened to Mary Ann? And what had my grandmother expected me to do with this 40-year bomb? I closed the diary and held the box tight against my body. The mission to rescue the memory was complete. The mission to seek justice, though, was only beginning, and I knew that confronting this truth meant confronting very powerful people. People who had already wiped an entire neighborhood off the map once. And I was alone. The last part of my grandmother's plan, I suspected, still hadn't revealed itself. I needed to find the final piece she'd left me. The attic mystery was now out in the open, under a harsh sun, ready to explode. I had to be as careful as she'd been. I had to be smart. The map had led me to the X, but the X was only the beginning of a war. I needed the final ammunition. I needed to understand what my grandmother did after Mary Ann vanished. I needed the end of this story. And then, listen, hold on to your seat, because this is where we reach the end of this crazy story. Me and Mike had just slipped through that torn fence, that invisible boundary the map insisted was there. What happened the moment we stepped to the other side, I can't really explain. The smell changed. It wasn't rotten brush or city sewer. It was the smell of an old house, dusty furniture, mothballs, and coffee that went cold 50 years ago. The light turned strange too. The sun was high, but it looked like it had gauze in front of it, yellowish, late afternoon light, even though it was noon. And the silence was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic. A vacuum of sound. The hidden village was there. I looked at Mike and he was pale. He doesn't scare easily, but seeing that piece of suburbia, something the world said didn't exist, frozen in time, tied a knot in his throat. The houses were the old kind, you know? Front porch, brickwork, neat little gardens, except all the plants were dead, petrified, like they'd been frozen mid-growth. No broken glass, no graffiti. It looked like the residents had left for a long weekend and forgotten to come back. This is unreal, Mike whispered. It's the map, I said, feeling the paper vibrate in my hand, even though it was just old paper. We followed the cobblestone road. The map was clear. It pointed to the heart of the hidden village, a square that must have been the community center. With every step, the feeling that we were trespassing on something sacred, something not meant to be seen, grew stronger. We reached the square. In the middle was a wooden bandstand, painted sea green, the paint peeling. Around it, 4 large houses stood out, more imposing than the rest, maybe belonging to people who'd mattered back then. The map marked one precise point, a red X right in front of the largest of those houses. When I looked at that house's facade, my heart tripled its pace. I recognized it instantly. Not the house where I lived, but the house in the faded photograph I'd found with the map. My grandfather's house. The house he'd left behind, or never left. The porch had a wooden swing, exactly like in the photo. The paint was sky blue, now faded and cracked with time. "It's here, Mike," I said. "It's his house." We climbed the steps slowly. The front door was only pulled to, not locked, as if it had been waiting for someone to open it. I pushed gently. The creak was loud, but the village's silence swallowed it almost immediately. Inside, time had stopped for good. The living room had furniture covered in white sheets, the kind you use when you travel and don't want dust settling. But it wasn't just dust. That dust was accumulated time, history. I followed instinct and the map's drawing, which seemed to glow faintly. It led me to a small study at the back of the house. A solid wooden desk with a green-shaded lamp. And on the wall behind the desk, I saw it. A safe. An iron safe set into the wall, hidden behind an old painting. "Bingo," Mike murmured, already pulling a flashlight from his backpack. The problem was the code. If my grandfather had left the map so I could find the place, he must have left the key to the secret. I searched the desk. The drawers were empty, except the last one. In the last drawer, there was a small leather-bound notebook. One of those old pocket diaries. I opened it. The handwriting was my grandfather's. Neat, careful. The diary covered the years 1956 to 1961. And there was the story of the hidden village, told by someone who had lived the drama. Sit down, because here comes the bomb. It wasn't a natural disaster or a curse. It was politics and money. My grandfather was one of the founders of the hidden village. The neighborhood was a community project, built with sweat and private funding, outside the city's official jurisdiction, on a piece of land that was a kind of no man's land back then. They built everything. They made a life. The problem was that in 1960 they discovered the area was geologically unstable, not that it would collapse, but that building a major highway nearby would be risky. To avoid a scandal and to avoid redoing the entire urban plan, the city council and the government at the time chose the dirtiest solution: erase the neighborhood. They didn't tear it down. They made a silence deal. Paid a hefty settlement to each family on the condition they sign a legal document stating the neighborhood had never existed, that it was an illegal settlement area, to be cleared. They literally erased it from records, street signs, official maps. Most families accepted, took the money and left. But my grandfather didn't. He didn't want money. He wanted the memory of the community he had helped build. The last pages of the diary were heartbreaking. He described neighbors leaving, the silence growing, the pain of watching life slip through his fingers. In the end he wrote, "I am the guardian of the hidden village. They can erase history on paper, but they can't erase what's here. I will stay to the end, and one day someone in my family will find this place, not to sell it, but to remember." The safe code is the founding date of the village, March 14, 1957. My eyes stung. My grandfather wasn't an eccentric madman who vanished. He was a hero who chose to protect a memory against power. 140357. I typed the sequence into the safe. The click was loud and sharp. Inside there were no gold bars or jewels. There was a stack of yellow documents and one object. The documents were the original land deeds, the village's engineering plans, and, most importantly, a complete handwritten list of every family that had lived there. My grandfather had kept the birth certificate of the hidden village. And the object? It was a key. A simple brass key with a small engraved tag that read, "The Portal." "What is that?" Mike asked, staring at the key. I picked it up and felt a shiver run through me. I looked at the map, folded on top of the desk. I brought the key and the map together. They belonged to each other. Reading the map's margins again, now with the key in hand, I understood. The map wasn't just meant to find the hidden village. It was meant to protect the secret. The hidden village was more than a forgotten neighborhood. It was a pocket of reality, kept outside of time. My grandfather, by staying there, by keeping the place intact and not allowing it to be vandalized or claimed, had created that bubble. The key and the map together were the guarantee that the bubble wouldn't burst. If I took those documents to City Hall, if I made noise, the village would be exposed. The law would move in, developers would follow, and that place, my grandfather's life's work, would be reduced to rubble or worse, turned into a luxury condo complex. I looked around. The covered furniture, the cutlery left in the sink, the clothes neatly folded in a corner. Their lives were all still there, just waiting. I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray my grandfather's sacrifice. "Mike," I said, my voice tight, "we take the diary and this list of names. The rest stays." "But what about the house? The inheritance?" "The inheritance is this story. The inheritance is knowing we had a grandfather who was more honorable than an entire government." I took the diary and the list of names. I folded the map and kept it, but I felt it had fulfilled its mission. The key I hung around my neck, under my shirt. Before leaving, I went to the kitchen. On the table there was an old coffee pot. I filled a glass with water at the sink and poured it onto the small front garden. A simple gesture, like a goodbye and a promise. "I'll take care of this." We left the house, closing the door gently, almost whispering. The way back felt different. There was no rush, but there was an immense responsibility. We walked along the cobblestones, and I looked at those old facades no longer like a curious visitor, but like the new guardian. When we reached the fence, the invisible border, I stopped. I looked back at the hidden village, swallowed by yellowed light and silence. It was beautiful, sad, and stubborn. I felt the key against my chest. It was a weight, but a good one. "Goodbye, Grandpa," I whispered. I crossed the fence. Mike followed right behind. The instant my feet touched the ground on the outside, everything returned. The distant noise of the city, the smell of fresh grass, the normal midday light. The map in my hand, which moments before had felt like a portal, was once again just an old piece of paper, stained with age. We walked back to the car in near total silence. Mike kept glancing at me, waiting for me to process it all. When we got home, I stored the diary and the list of names somewhere safe. The map I took back up to the attic, but I didn't put it back in the box. I hung it on the wall like a picture, under a dim light. The key I never took off my neck. And life went on. I went back to work, back to routine. But I wasn't the same anymore. I carried a massive secret, an entire suburb that depended on my silence. From time to time, I take out my grandfather's diary and read the stories of the hidden village. I remember the families' names, the festivals in the square, the kids playing ball. I honor their memory. And the attic? The attic became my favorite place in the house. Not because I use it again, but because I know that under that dusty roof there's proof that history isn't always written in official books. Sometimes it's guarded by a stubborn man, a hand-drawn map, and a deep love for a place the world chose to forget. The hidden village is still there, invisible, waiting. And I, the grandson who just wanted to clean up a mess, became the guardian of the suburb that disappeared. That's it, everyone. The adventure of the attic map is over, but the story of the hidden village, will be told by me, and by all of you, who now carry a small piece of this secret in your hearts. Thank you for listening.